Tzadik Gimel Amud Aleph, 93a. We are 7 lines from the bottom of the page. The first word on the line is V'gomer, and then we are the second word, Aleph Lamed Amalei. So we're in the middle of the story of the two false prophets, Achav and Tzidkiah, right? Did you pronounce it? And they use their false prophecy to try to conspire to seduce the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. He's onto their scheme, throws them into the furnace. And they convinced Nebuchadnezzar that just like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were three, in order to be saved from the fire as prophets, they need 3 people in the fire. So Nebuchadnezzar said, no problem, find the third Jew and we'll throw him in too. So they picked Yehoshua, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, hoping that his schos, his merit, would save them. So as we learned, they died and Yeshua survived, except that they were toasted, actually, more than just killed, they were toasted, the Gemara says. And but Yeshua's clothing were singed. They were burnt. So it's a little bit of a less miracle than Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who emerged wearing their hats and jackets. Not literally, but their tunics and their turbans and whatnot. Okay, so now Nebuchadnezzar addresses Yeshua. Figured it out?
I don't know. I don't think that maybe I have to recharge it.
I'll send him the video. Okay, so Amalei, Nebuchadnezzar tells Yeshua, Yadanai, now I know that the fact that you survived, that that you are a tzaddik, you survived the fire, it's a miraculous event. Ella, but my tamahani bach porta nura. So why is it that a little bit of fire affected you, and that your clothing were burnt? But Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah, the 3 of them, lo yahanebuhu klal. The fire had no hold on them. They emerged with their clothing. So Amar Le, Yeshua responds, Inu tzalosahava. There were 3 tzaddikim, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. V'ano echad, I'm one tzaddik alone, amongst 2 other wicked, Achav and Tzidkiah. Amalei, so Nebuchadnezzar says to Yeshua, V'Avram yechidi hava. Avram was one, and he was thrown into a furnace, and he emerged also unscathed. So the excuse that 3 people is greater than 1 isn't good enough, because you can have one person who's also going to survive at the highest level, like Avraham. So why don't you have the same? So Yeshua responds, Hasam, there, with respect to Avram, he was thrown alone. He wasn't thrown in with other wicked people. So the Satan, so to speak, wasn't there at all. In the story here, the Satan was there. Right? The verse they quoted was the Satan was there next to Yeshua, killing the others, and thus ruined his clothing. So it was because of the other 2 wicked people that were with him that he couldn't emerge with his clothing on. And because there was no wicked by Avram, fire wasn't given permission to do anything. But in my situation here, I had 2 wicked people with me. And fire was given permission to do something. And thus, at least my clothing was burnt. And of this comes the colloquial saying, at least during time, which is, Trei udi yavishi, if you have 2 dry logs, and 1 wet log, the dry logs will burn the wet log. If you have 1 wet log, it's going to be hard to light it. But if you have 2 dry logs, you can light them. This is physically 2 dry logs, and you light them, the wet log will eventually dry out. So the point is that the company you're in changes the merit you have, and thus this Yeshua, even though he may have been a tzaddik as worthy of nothing to happen to him, but because he had 2 wicked with him, at least his clothing were burnt. End story. But in the Gemara's analyzation of the story, they don't accept this response. This conversation with Nebuchadnezzar and Yeshua, they don't accept it. And as Rashi says, because Yeshua was kind of just he wanted to get Nebuchadnezzar. get Nebuchadnezzar off his back, so to speak. So he's answering him just so that he would understand it. And I guess he didn't want to show weakness to Nebuchadnezzar and actually admit to some fault that he had. So he just told him this whole explanation. But for the Gemara's purposes, the Gemara assumes that if he was perfect tzaddik, he would have been saved, no matter who is with, which company he's in. And if the Gemara asks, "My time Einish, why was he punished? Why was he punished? Why was his clothing even burnt?" And the fact that he had wicked in his company is not good enough for the Gemara. He should have been saved. So Amar Papa says, "Shayu banov noisim nashim she'ein hoganos," because his daughters, sons, married women that were not appropriate lakona for a kohen. He was a kohen gadol. His children are, of course, kohanim. Kohanim have restrictions on who they're allowed to marry above and beyond every ordinary Jew, and they married. Now he's not responsible for his children's sins, but the key is he didn't protest or didn't try to convince them out of it. So the fact that Yeshua's children married non-Jews actually mentioned in the verse explicitly. Stands as opposed to a different verse. But the Gemara now needs to bring a proof that Yeshua is somewhat responsible for it. Not just that they happened. The fact that it happened doesn't necessarily make him responsible. But the Gemara is stating that the reason why he's punished is because Lemicha. He didn't object. He didn't try to intervene, which means he's somewhat responsible. So we need to find a verse that says that. So says the Gemara, remember the verse reads, Yeshua hayalavish begadim sayim. Yeshua, the high priest, was wearing dirty clothing. And the Gemara goes on to say, the verse goes on to say, he's standing before an angel, but he's wearing dirty clothing.
In the vision of Zechariah.
In Zechariah's vision.
Yeah, so obvious question, why is he wearing dirty clothing?
So says the Gemara, Yeshua the high priest walking around with dirty clothing, why would he see that? El Melamed teaches you that his daughters, his sons married women, girls, were not appropriate for a kohen, and he didn't object. So it's interesting. What does Yeshua see? What does Zechariah see? That Yeshua is wearing dirty clothing. His punishment in the fire is that his clothing were burnt. Obviously, there's a clear match. In fact, moreover, this idea of begadim sayim, dirty clothing, Chassidus talks about it quite a bit. What does clothing mean? What's clothing? As opposed to your body, or even
that we do, the way we conduct ourselves.
Yeah, why levushim? Why clothing?
The spiritual clothing around us.
So why clothing? Clothing is the kind of thing you can change.
It's not really you.
It's not me. It's something I can change. But it's the way I present myself. In other words, I always have to have clothing on me, but I can change what the clothing are. Right? So there are certain parts of me.
Your midot are clothing, or it's
So it depends on the context. So usually speaking, clothing is thought, speech, and action. Generally speaking, thoughts, machshava de b'maisa. Why? Because I can choose. It usually machshava de b'maisa is clothing. Because there's in every context you have to think about what am I capable of changing, and what am I incapable of changing. So generally speaking, the way in which I think, the way in which I understand the world, and the way in which I feel about the world is very difficult to change. It's possible for a person to change how he feels and thinks about the world, but it's very difficult. It takes a lot of work to change a midah. But the way I act, I can decide anytime I want. Even the way I think, I can't stop my thoughts, but I can choose to think about things that I don't want to think about. Same thing certainly with speech. I can choose to say, there's time to speak, time to be quiet. You can speak and you can not speak. You can certainly choose what you want to speak about. And same thing with action. You can decide to do something, decide not to do something, and you can certainly change what you do. But even thought, which runs continuously, a person can change what they think about. In the language of the Alter Rebbe is afil b'shasha lev chomed, even when the heart is burning with a desire for something, and maybe it's very difficult to stop yourself from wanting something. But you can divert your attention, especially if you're diverting your attention to Torah. So levushim tzoyim, dirty clothing, means that which you could have easily changed, you didn't. Sometimes it's even deeper. So for example, a person has a human desire to procreate. That's how humans are, and it's supposed to be that way. If we didn't have the desire, the human race would run out very quickly. It's supposed to be this way. So the problem is not the desire the person has. The question is, what's the object of the desire? That's like a lavush. I can change the object of the desire, even if I can't change the initial desire. See, a simple example is also hunger. I can't stop being hungry. But which food I'm hungry for I can change. Kosher or not kosher. But I can't change the fact that I'm hungry. That's the difference between lavush and the body. The body itself is, I can't change my body. So certain things about me I just can't change. But the lavush, the way in which that body is packaged, I can change. So lavushim tzoyim, begadim tzoyim, dirty clothing, is used as a term in Chassidus often for something that a person could have changed, should have changed, and is capable of changing. Just by taking it off and putting new clothing on, putting different clothing on. So it's a double-edged thing. On the one hand, it indicates something very external. It's not, Yeshua himself was not dirty. His clothing were dirty. It's external. It's a very minor Aveda. It's a very, very minor Aveda. It's very external. It didn't stop his sons, who have their own free choice, from doing something wrong. It's very external. On the other hand, clothing also indicates you could have easily changed it. A body that's bruised, to heal it, you have to go to a doctor to fix it. But to change clothing, go to your wardrobe and change your clothing. It's very simple. So likewise, here, on the one hand, it's a very minor Aveda. It's not like he sinned, God forbid. He didn't stop his children from. On the other hand, the fact that his dirty clothing seems to imply he could have easily changed it. And perhaps metaphorically, his clothing is being burnt as if to say we're cleansing out his actions. Even though he as a person, internally, is a good person, doesn't deserve to be burning, which means his head was in the right place, his heart was in the right place. His body didn't burn, his body didn't need cleansing, because he was wholesome. It's his clothing, it's external behavior that he should have changed that needs to be cleansed, and thus it's burnt.
To the other people.
Right.
It's not something that you can hide.
Yeah. But Klape Shemayim Galia, right? To Hashem, everything is open. Hashem would know if his body needed cleansing, but it didn't. Only his clothing needed cleansing.
Maybe the point is the fact that the clothes were dirty because people saw it, created a bad impression. The Kohen Gadol with children are married to people that are not appropriate to Kohen. It creates a bad impression for the Kahuna in general. So
but if he couldn't do anything, then you can't hold it.
In Shemayim, of course, right, they think so different.
If he couldn't do anything, then he's not responsible, even if it did have bad impression. But it therefore must be he wasn't responsible. That's why I'm using this metaphor.
But both, you combine both.
Yeah.
But if impact on people, plus of course his own obligation.
Yeah. So I think that there's a double-edged sword here, and that on the one hand, it's very external, it's a small sin, it's like clothing, it's not his body. But on the other hand, it's easily changeable, it's easily cleansed. Much more difficult than changing one's internal experience, one's body, metaphorically.
So clothing is the kvodo shel adam. It's the honor of a person, the clothing. It's a very high, the clothing comes from a very high place.
Yeah.
Hashem malach geut lavesh.
Yeah.
The clothing of Hashem.
Yeah. So Chassidus explains that specifically, the reason that is because, right, so the clothing are thought, speech, and action. A person thinks, speaks, and acts, as we just explained. Where are mitzvahs? 90% of the mitzvahs are not in your feelings, or even in your seichel. They're in your thought, speech, and action. That's where the mitzvahs are. So the mitzvahs are lavushim, right? So even though on the one hand, a lavush is more, if you're measuring the person's experience, an act could be lower. His emotions for Hashem, that's much higher. His action for Hashem, if you're measuring the person, could be lower. But if you're measuring from the truth of what Hashem wants, then his action might be deeper than his emotion. Because a person has feelings for Hashem, how high are his feelings? As high as he is as a human being. But if a person doesn't act for Hashem, how high is that act? It's on Hashem's terms. It's Hashem's tefillin, not my tefillin. Right? So on the one hand, from my perspective, an act is lower. But from Hashem's perspective, the act actually reaches higher. Asiya le'elo. The action goes all the way to the top because that's what Hashem actually wanted. And that's where he says Hashem malach ge'es lavish, and that Hashem put the clothing on of a mitzvah. In other words, Hashem himself is beyond any whatever it is. Hashem chose to put on these clothing so that he can present himself to you through these acts that you do. So it also has this lavush element.
So you can see the importance of the mitzvot.
Right. So the Walter puts in Perek Daled is that there's no person is giving the king a hug. Right. So the fact that he's wearing clothing doesn't change the fact that you're hugging the person less. Who are you hugging when you hug a person? Not hugging his shirt, not even hugging his body. You're hugging that person. The nefesh you say you're hugging, but you can't touch a nefesh, right? And it's inappropriate to touch your body. So you're hugging the person in his shirt and in his jacket, but you're really hugging the person itself. So Hashem himself, Geus Lovish, puts on these clothing of Torah mitzvahs. So when you're putting on tefillin, you're doing a mitzvah, it's like you're hugging the king. But what are you hugging? The leather box. The point is Hashem, who's invested and clothed, mitlabesh, into those leather boxes that you're connecting with.
But when you see a person with dirty clothing, you don't want to hug him.
You don't want to hug them. That's right. So a person's actions, going full circle, if his actions are dirty, even if it's only very external, and could easily be changed, it still holds the person off from connection. Yeah, so that brings the whole thing.
Somebody in a high level of spiritual level, he
exudes, yeah.
Chachmas Adam Tarapanov.
Feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a higher level. Chachmas Adam is a much deeper level. Okay. Okay, I'll stop over here because the Gemara gets on to another section, which is also very interesting. So this has a lot to say about the next thing about David HaMelech and Shaul, and some more exciting history, get into Bar Kochba. Some exciting history coming.
Levush also refers to Torah. There's like the Pnimis Torah, and then there's a Levush, like the stories are put in a way people can understand, but of course behind that there's a much...
Right.
When it says here, Nashim she'enan hagunot.
L'kuhuna.
L'kuhuna, like for example...
L'kuhuna. Not that they were bad girls.
It could have been, for example, converts. It could have been...
Someone who's forbidden for a kohen to marry.
Divorcee or something like
it could be a
Ein hagonis l'kuhuna. Not that they were nice women. They could have been good girls.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not for the kohen.
But for halachically speaking, it was not appropriate for a kohen. That's the implication. So it's not she'ein hagonis, but she'ein hagonis l'kuhuna.
They bring down the kohanim.
Well, no, the children aren't kohanim anymore. The children are
The children become halalim.
Yeah, they're not kohanim anymore.
It means that someone who halachically speaking, a kohen cannot marry. That's what it means.
Yeah.
All right, have a wonderful day, everybody.